when they no longer can return to that land. The land that has really defined them to themselves, their connection to their family, to the livestock, to the shrines, to the mountains that are around them. If they lose this, then they are losing the thing that is most precious to them, which we might call our soul.
I really wish that Navajo leaders and Navajo people generally would take a look at this and say, we don't like it, it's rotten, it's unfair, we wish they had done it some other way. But we're Americans like everyone else, and we can change if we have to, and we'll find some more land that our kids will think is just as good as this land, and get on with it.
I don't know who these white people are. I hear they come from someplace across the water. And now they're telling everyone what to do.
Indians have been paying with their lives for the white man's greed since the arrival of Columbus. White settlers moving west considered the land theirs for the taking. They demanded the Indians be killed or confined. An officer in the United States Cavalry wrote,
"By the colonization and subjugation of the Navajo tribe, we gain for civilization their whole country. There is evidence of gold fields, of veins of silver, and the richest copper. I have come to kill Indians, and I believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven."
Colonel Kit Carson burned Navajo crops, slaughtered Navajo livestock, and murdered innocent people. The 8,000 Navajo that survived were herded across the New Mexican desert in winter. Hundreds perished along the way, the old, the young, the helpless. Those that couldn't walk any further were left to die in the snow. The survivors called this the Long Walk. They called their destination the place of suffering. 80 years later, the Nazis would study these internment camps for Indians to design their concentration camps for Jews. No shelter was provided. They dug holes in the ground and covered themselves with branches. They were given coffee and flour. They boiled the unfamiliar coffee beans, threw out the coffee, and ate the beans. They died of dysentery, hunger, and despair. They begged to be allowed to go home. The Navajos' captivity ended when the taxpayers protested. It cost $1 million a year to keep them captive. In 1868, Congress signed a treaty with the chiefs of the tribe. The Navajo were restricted to a reservation. They promised to send their children to government schools and to give up fighting forever. In exchange, they were released and given 2 sheep each. Somehow they survived. Their few sheep became large herds. The women developed the art of weaving rugs for trade with the whites. The men developed their silver-making skills to craft fine jewelry. They kept their word and gave up the life of the warrior. As their population grew and their herds expanded, the Navajo spread out across the land. No one explained to the Navajo exactly where their reservation was, and there were no boundary markers on this desert land. The concept of being restricted was as alien to the Navajo as partitioning the air or owning a star. Some Navajo returned to the land they had occupied before captivity, near the Hopi villages of Black Mesa. The Hopi accepted the return of their Navajo neighbors as long as they didn't take land the Hopi themselves were using.
This area, the Four Corners area, is set aside as a refuge for all native people and other people who want to live in peace.
The peace the Hopi wanted was not to be. The United States military occupied Hopi land. They sent bureaucrats and allowed missionaries to control the peaceful Hopis.
The BIA agent, the Bureau of Indian Affairs official, was in effect the law on the scene. And they set the rules as to what Indians did or didn't do and what their religious practices were or weren't and so forth. The idea was to take the culture and rip it out of the Hopi people. Hundreds of miles away, the children would be trucked to boarding schools where they would stay for great periods of time, have their hair cut, their names changed, forbidden to speak Hopi, forced to speak English, forced to attend Christian services, denied the right to practice their Hopi religions, etc.
As I grew up, I began to take notice that there were white people among us, you know, a few of them among us, and the people, our parents used to say to run when you see a Bahana coming, you know, they'll grab you and take you to school. They had to hire the army to come and get us and take us to Keams Canyon, which is a boarding school. And we stayed there for many years without ever coming home, and then we were older. And we sort of grew away from our people, you know.
When the Hopis resisted this passively, they were summarily treated as criminals. There are documents in the archives which will show you photographs of whole groups of Hopi leaders hauled off to Alcatraz on the conviction of the local BIA agent.
To consolidate federal control over the Hopi, the government agent drew an arbitrary rectangle on a map, depriving the Hopi of millions of acres they had considered their own. With the stroke of a pen, the Hopi, like the Navajo, became wards of the federal government.
You know, that's the historical legal framework that led to this present dispute. The idea that the federal government can give and take Indian land willy-nilly as it sees fit, with no legal restraint whatsoever.
Those lands weren't the lands of the United States with which to do as they pleased. Those were native people's lands, and I think the problems that we're now seeing would not have arisen had it not been for the conduct of the United States in those times.
There were 500 Navajo living inside the Hopi reservation when it was formed. The government not only allowed them to stay, but also encouraged more and more Navajo to move into the Hopi reservation.
As far as I can remember, the Navajos have come into our area, and they've brought in wood and they bring mutton, and we trade with them, and we trade our corn and beans, melon, things like that, and so we are dependent on each other for our livelihood.
In 1884, the Indian agent wrote,
"The best of good feelings generally exists between these two tribes. They constantly mingle at festivals, dances, and feasts.
It was these dances that first drew white curiosity seekers to Hopi land. In August of each year, when the earth was dry and cracked, the Hopi priest prayed for rain with rattlesnakes in their teeth. If the Hopi had been living in a humble way, the rains would come. The Hopi tried to teach the white Americans to respect the power of their ways. But their ceremonies, which echoed the archaic womb of human consciousness, resonated from a depth that few whites could comprehend. While the Hopi prayed for and with nature, the whites were hell-bent on conquering her. The completion of the Santa Fe Railroad accelerated the white man's penetration into Indian territory. The trains brought with them alcohol and diseases to which the Indians had no resistance. Small towns sprung up. Homesteaders and prospectors began settling on Indian lands. The influx of white settlers caused conflicts with the Navajo, whose own population had expanded rapidly. To protect the settlers and the Navajo from one another, the government was forced to expand the Navajo reservation until it completely surrounded the Hopi reservation. Having confined the Indians to land he thought worthless, the white man discovered that beneath the tangle of corn plant roots lay vast quantities of oil. The mining companies pressured the Department of the Interior to set up tribal councils on the reservations, which could then sign leases on behalf of the tribes. The first Navajo Tribal Council was handpicked by the Secretary of the Interior and was forbidden to meet except in his presence.
The Tribal Council was established in the 1920s to sign contracts on behalf of the Navajo people for energy development, for oil development at that time. And ever since, the attitude of political leaders in Phoenix and the rest of Arizona has been that the purpose of tribal government is to go along with whatever programs are proposed.
It was not set up to serve the Navajo people. It was so that there would be a formal way, an official way of having endorsement for development of Navajo land. The Navajo tribal government to this day operates as a corporation. It does not have the welfare of people as the purpose for which it exists.
To solidify control over both tribes, the BIA set up a Hopi Tribal Council. The Hopi already had a system of government through which they had lived in peace for thousands of years. The traditional leaders protested.
We do not accept or recognize the Tribal Council, and we will never work with them because our work as Hopi traditional and religious leaders, we go through our ceremonies and other religious activity, and we sincerely believe that we are taking care of all living things on this earth, all people. This is our work. So we cannot follow that other system and create trouble for any person.
The vote by which the Constitution was supposedly adopted was a vote by only a tiny minority of the Hopi people. It was conducted in an atmosphere characterized by all kinds of fraud and deception and trickery on the part of the Interior Department and those who supported them.
Oliver Lafarge, who conducted the election for the government, later confessed to the injustice he himself had perpetrated on the Hopi people.
The Hopis have been operated on by everybody from Coronado to Kit Carson to Oliver Lafarge. In almost every case, they've suffered for it. Why they should ever trust another white man is a mystery to me.
Oil leasing underway, the BIA began seizing Hopi and Navajo livestock. To discourage overgrazing, the government killed or confiscated more than 500,000 Navajo livestock. Many animals were shot and left to die near the people who had cared for them.
Washington says, whatever my wish, it is to be obeyed. That's the only thing that Washington stands for. But his plans are no good, and so today we will starve.
The grass became worse after stock reduction, and because of new government grazing restrictions, the people were not allowed to move around in search of better grass. Each family settled in one place and tried to hang on to as much land as possible. They were becoming more like white people, each one saying, "This is my land, go away." Many Navajo were forced to leave the land. To support their families, some men found work with the mining companies, who were staking their claim to the mineral wealth of the Southwest. World War II changed the lives of the Navajo forever. Some Navajo went to work in